Italian front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it.
Well, interesting exchange. Let's head to Westminster. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Harry Farley, because we had Prime Minister's questions a little earlier. Harry, take me through what Keir Starmer said, what the opposition pushed him on, and did he address directly that slight from Donald Trump of yesterday, you're no Winston Churchill?
Not directly, but there was an overall defence from the Prime Minister to his approach to this conflict, for his justification for not allowing the US military to use British bases for that initial offensive action against Iran, although then allowing them to use those bases for that defensive action to target those missile launchers and so on. A broad defence from Starmer of his position and of the actions he has taken. But the thing that I was struck the most by is that so often when it comes to international conflict, the House of Commons, and particularly the Labour and the Conservative parties, are often broadly in the same place. There is a kind of quite commonly a coming together. Doesn't always happen. Think about back to when David Cameron was considering whether to strike Syria back in 2014 or so. That it doesn't always happen, but quite often it does when it comes to foreign policy. That is not the case at the moment. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, very on the front foot when it comes to her criticism of Sir Keir Starmer, particularly of that decision not to allow the US to use those military bases, and actually not to allow the UK military to be involved directly themselves in this war. She says that we're asking our allies to do what we should be doing ourselves. Of course, British bases have been targeted, that base in Cyprus, and her argument from the Conservatives is that the British military should be directly involved in retaliating against that. Sir Keir Starmer, for his part, defended his action. He said he wasn't prepared to involve British troops without what he said, without lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. The implication, of course, is that he thinks that the US and Israeli war does not have a lawful basis and does not have a viable, thought-through plan. And as you mentioned, that criticism from Donald Trump, I mean, it's fair to say that relationship between those two men that was so often the sort of pivot point, the central thesis behind Sir Keir Starmer's foreign policy, that is at an increasingly low point.
Harry, there at Westminster, thanks very much. Let's turn to Mikey Kay in the studio with me. Harry, Mikey, a lot of attention on HMS Dragon. We know it's going to go, but not till next week now.
Yeah, Type 45 destroyer, Matthew. I think we've got some footage of the Type 45. We can just take a look at that, give the viewers a little bit of a look. It is the UK's most advanced air defence surface warship. That's the Type 45 there. It carries an air defence system called Sea Viper. That's not the name of the missile. That's the name of the system. The missiles it carries are the Aster 15 and the Aster 30. The Aster 15 has a speed of Mach 3. The Aster 30 has a speed of about Mach 4 to Mach 4.5. I think what's really interesting about this is it's got a very broad remit, okay? So this destroyer, the air defense system, the Sea Viper, it's got a broad remit in terms of what it's supposed to take out. It's aircraft, it's drones, it's ballistic missiles, it's cruise missiles. So when you're looking at 1.2 million a pop, you've got to understand that wide remit brings into analysis the cost benefit versus the stockpiles.
In terms of the threat from drones, that's an immediate threat. So what is being sent immediately? Yeah,
so there are Lynx Wildcat helicopters. They're going to be deployed into the region. Let's take a look at a picture of this capability. That's the Wildcat. It carries the lightweight multi-role missile, LMM, which is got a range of about 6 to 8 kilometers, and that's specifically designed for a drone threat. It carries 10 on either pylon, so 20 in total. So, you know, a good capability. The questions I've got, though, is that this is a airborne. Here we go. You can see the missiles under the Wildcat there. This is an airborne capability. There is a similar system that's ground-based that carries the same missile that's called Rapid Sentry. Now, when you're dealing with helicopters, I used to fly them for 20 years, they've got a certain amount of endurance, and so they can be in the air only for a specific amount of time. So I think the big questions on deploying this capability are how they're going to keep a 24/7 coverage for a drone threat using these helicopters rather than what's called rapid sentry, which is the ground-based system.
Mikey, thanks for telling us about those latest deployments. Before we take a break, just to bring you up to date, the Israeli army saying new missiles have been launched from Iran. Explosions have been heard in Iraq's Erbil, and the US Embassy also telling Americans to leave Iraq now. So those some of the latest developments back here in just a moment or two around the world. And across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Southern Lebanon. Let's get the latest from Wira Davis, who's in Beirut for us, following developments.
UNIFIL is the United Nations border force that monitors and tries to demarcate the border between Israel and Lebanon. And in the last few minutes, we've heard from UNIFIL, it says that the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli military, have indeed entered several villages close to the blue line. Now, the blue line is the unofficial border, the border that's been demarcated between Israel and Lebanon. So it would appear that much promised Israeli incursion, an invasion as it will be seen here in Lebanon into Lebanese territory, has begun. We're not sure how far and how deep Israeli forces are going to go into Lebanon, but they have issued a warning earlier today to all Lebanese civilians south of the river Litani to head north immediately. If they do not move, then they may be considered, or where they live and where they're staying may be considered as a target. It is thought that about 250,000 people will be affected by this order from the Israelis, and it appears that Israel is following through with its threat to move into southern Lebanon, to stop on the first hand Hezbollah firing rockets into northern Israel, and to defeat Hezbollah certainly as a fighting force. So as a confirmation there from the UN down on the border that Israeli troops have now moved into parts of southern Lebanon.
Wira Davis in Beirut. Let's turn to another leg of everything that we're seeing. The economic impact of this conflict, it's already profound. Some markets starting to rebound, but not before the Asian stock markets fell for a third day in a row. Crude oil prices rising as well. Trading was actually suspended in South Korea and Thailand after share indexes lost more than 8%. Japan's Nikkei fell nearly 4%. Well, the latest figures show around 200 international oil tankers are now stuck in the Gulf after traffic through the Strait of Hormuz ground to a halt. It's one of the world's most important oil shipping routes. Well, let's cross now to Riyadh and speak to the business journalist Samir Hashmi, who is there for us. And Samir, welcome here to the program. Let's start with oil prices, Brent crude. What are you actually seeing?
Well, there, Matthew, Brent crude prices have shot up substantially over the last 2 or 3 days. Yesterday, it touched the $85 mark for the first time since June 2024. Even today, it was quite volatile. I mean, it is definitely a huge worry at this point of time, because you're looking at this region, at the Strait of Hormuz, which has the largest concentration of oil producers in one place. You have countries like Saudi Arabia, the largest exporter of oil, that uses this passage. Other countries like Kuwait, the UAE, and even LPG, which is gas, is also it's a critical point for passage because Qatar is one of the largest producers for that. So it's not just oil, but even LPG prices have also shot up substantially. In fact, the European gas prices had shot up by 50% on the second day of the war, just because after the LPG refinery in Qatar got hit and Qatar halted its operations over there.
Let's turn to the Strait of Hormuz because I read out a statistic earlier that was saying that 90% of traffic is now brought to a standstill. Donald Trump said a couple of days ago that he was thinking about underwriting insurance, perhaps having military escorts for tankers. Is that reassuring anyone, even if it happens?
Not at the moment, Matthew, because it's a very complicated process of really when it comes to this business of oil. So here are two problems. Number one, the oil itself, that's not able to move. On any given day, you have between 80 to 85 vessels that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. These are vessels that are carrying crude usually. Today, I was just checking up the latest numbers, what we have on the tracker, only 2 vessels were able to pass through. So that's more than 90% of the ships really couldn't go through. The biggest hit would be the South Asian economies, because between China, India, South Korea, and Japan, they receive 70% of their crude from the Strait of Hormuz. So imagine that is stopped suddenly, and that's going to have a severe impact on these countries. China is a little better off because they have some buffer stockpile, but countries like India, which gets almost half of its crude supplies, that includes LPG as well, along with oil, will be massively impacted in the days or weeks to come. And similarly, even countries like South Korea and Japan.
Yes.
So it is a massive challenge. And even the point you made about Donald Trump giving those assurances have already shot up massively, and that's not something that insurance companies would be easily able to buy. This argument that the United States is going to write them off unless they get something concrete on paper.
Real quick one, 30 seconds if you would. Just give me an idea of what it's like actually being there in the region.
It's really tense, Matthew. It's an unprecedented situation, the worst war this Persian Gulf region has seen since 1991, the Gulf War in 91. I'm usually based in Dubai. I was here for work and I've not been able to go back. Riyadh is still a bit calmer, but if you talk to a lot of people in Dubai, as I've been speaking to, they're very worried because they've never seen something like that. Relentless attacks every day, even though the UAE government has managed to intercept the missiles, but people are staying indoors. So there is a huge amount of uncertainty, but also
load before this crisis used to cost you about $200,000 to insure. Now it costs you a couple of million even. So that is prohibitively expensive. And you've also got just the risk to life and limb, never mind the risk to the ship being sunk and you losing lots of money. And that is why we've got 200 tankers stranded in the Gulf now, not moving through the Straits of Hormuz. There may be some very limited traffic, but basically it's not worth the commercial risk and it's not worth the risk to life and limb of them moving through the Gulf at the moment. And insurers and the marine insurance market have been saying they won't underwrite these war premiums anymore, simply for the reason that it's a bit like underwriting divorce insurance. It's far too likely to happen. So this is something that becomes uneconomic.
We are out of time. That is it for this edition of BBC Your Voice. Thanks as always to Gordon Carrera, Andy Verity and Barbara Plett-Usher. And thanks to you for all of those questions you sent in. Until next time, bye-bye for now. The evacuations that we know with so many Britons, Americans trying to get out of the region. Some British nationals are due to be flown home in a government-chartered flight in just a few hours' time, as those Iranian missiles and drone attacks continue around the Gulf and, of course, leave commercial flights grounded. Well, our reporter Megan Owen has all the details. She's here in the studio with me. Megan, take me through it.
Yeah, well, we've been hearing from a lot of people who are very stressed about the situation and the disruption and the money it's costing them. Well, air travel in the Middle East has been severely disrupted since Saturday, when the US and Israel launched strikes on Iran, with over 4,000 flights a day cancelled since the airspace was closed. Now, Flight Radar monitors air travel, and this map here gives you a good sense of just how widespread that disruption is. Now, this here is the situation on Saturday before the strikes. We can now take a look at the situation this morning. You can see here huge gaps over Iran and the Middle East, no planes flying in that airspace. Now, the vast majority of global flights to countries in the region have been cancelled, and thousands of foreign nationals from all over the world are currently stranded or unable to get connecting flights. Now, between 500,000 and 1 million Americans are estimated to be in the region, and 300,000 Brits are thought to be in the Gulf. Half of those have asked for help in getting back home. Now, the British Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, stresses that their safety and security are a top priority, and the UK government is chartering 3 repatriation flights. The first is due to Oman around 11 p.m. local time this evening, and vulnerable people will be prioritised for that flight first. Now, the US also says that it's securing military and charter planes to pick up American citizens who also want to leave. Now, meanwhile, there are a few commercial flights operating out of Oman and Dubai, but these are few and far between. And you know, let's just remind ourselves there are thousands desperate to leave the region. We've been speaking to some of them, including Theodore and Crystal, pictured here. Now, they are stuck in Dubai. They can't get home to New York, and they've just been told there are no flights until the 8th of March. So they've got a long time to wait. And also Katie from the UK, who is stuck in Bali.
We are currently in a hotel/Airbnb for the cheaper pricing. It just made more sense to be able to cook our own food and not have to pay for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We also contacted our local politicians back home. We're waiting on an answer from them to see if they can help us in any way possible.
There is a flight due to go tonight at midnight to Dubai, but then there is no guarantee of leaving there within 2 weeks. And we'd have to sort our own accommodation out, from what we understand. It's not looking great at the moment. We're waiting to go in and speak and see what we can do.
So just some of those who got in touch with the BBC about their stories of travel disruption. Well, in terms of advice, countries including the UK are advising against all but essential travel to the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait and Qatar. For now, though, many travellers say they are being forced to wait or find their own way out. You're with BBC News. We're bringing you live coverage as the US-Israeli war with Iran continues, now in its 5th day. Well, let's bring you these live pictures that show you the scene across parts of the Middle East. We're monitoring the situation as events unfold. Israel has launched fresh attacks as the war with Iran shows no signs of letting up. Large explosions have been reported in Tehran, where Israel says it has begun a new wave of broad-scale strikes. Israel also says it has hit security headquarters across the capital. Well, the number of people killed in Iran is reported to have surpassed 1,000 civilians since the conflict began on Saturday. The Israel Defense Forces say one of its fighter planes has shot down an Iranian Air Force jet over Tehran. Well, we can bring you the latest pictures we've seen from Tehran, I believe, and here you'll be able to see the extent of the damage from the Israeli airstrikes. There are damaged buildings and cars. We've seen smoke rising over the skyline and rescue workers clearing the rubble away. Now, a rights group who monitor the situation inside Iran have put the number of dead in recent days to more than 1,000, but the BBC isn't able to independently verify this. Well, let's have another look at one of our live shots that we can show you, which is Lebanon. We can go to the capital of Lebanon, Beirut, and 72 people are reported to have been killed, with over 400 injured since Monday. That's according to the latest figures from the health ministry there. Israel has been targeting the armed group Hezbollah. The organisation is an ally of Tehran, and in the last few hours we've heard that the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Lebanon has told the BBC that the Israeli military has entered several Lebanese villages near the Blue Line, the UN demarcated boundary between Lebanon and Israel. And this comes after the Israeli military warned residents of all towns and villages in southern Lebanon to leave ahead of that expected military operation. Well, we've been seeing smoke rising above the skyline as the evening settled in Beirut. We've also heard the sound of sirens. We will continue to monitor the situation there. We also know that Iran has continued to fire missiles across the Middle East as it comes under intense attack from the United States and Israel. Missiles and drones targeting Israel, Saudi Arabia and Iraq have been shot down, but another struck a US-run airbase in Qatar. And as the conflict entered a 5th day, the US military said it had struck nearly 2,000 targets in Iran since launching its campaign. Well, earlier today, in the last few hours, we heard from the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who was speaking from the Pentagon. He said that the US sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean with a torpedo fired by a US submarine. The Defense Secretary didn't name the ship, but the Sri Lanka's Navy recovered at least 80 bodies and rescued 32 sailors after a distress call from an Iranian frigate. They said that when the naval vessels reached the area, there was no sign of the warship. They just saw patches of oil and life rafts on the water. Hegseth also praised what he called bold action from President Trump, saying the president was putting America first. And he said the results over the past 4 days have been, in his words, incredible, historic, really. And he referred to the Iranian regime, saying they are toast and they know it. Well, we've also been seeing pictures from Portsmouth this afternoon, where a Royal Navy warship, HMS Dragon, is preparing to head to Cyprus. The warship is currently being loaded with ammunition. It's not actually expected to sail towards Cyprus until next week. So Keir Starmer said on social media yesterday that he had spoken to the president of Cyprus about deploying the Type 45 destroyer, which can be used to shoot down ballistic missiles. So this comes after RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was hit by a drone on Sunday. The Ministry of Defence said it only caused minimal damage. The ship is expected to take between 5 and 7 days to get to the region, and 2 Royal Navy Wildcat helicopters are also being sent. They are equipped with missiles which are designed to counter drone attacks. Well, we will continue to monitor the situation as events unfold here on BBC News.
Let's bring you more now from that briefing that we've just had from Pete Hegseth, asked by Tom Bateman, my colleague in Washington, for any update on the girls' school in Iran that was attacked on the first day of the war. Iran saying about 160 people died in that attack.
Thank you. Tom Bateman with the BBC. Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look and investigating that. Red tie in front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
And then he moved quickly on, but he did say a lot more in that briefing. So let's bring in our correspondent in Washington, Helena Humphrey. Helena, firstly, what did you make of the tone of the briefing from the Joint Chiefs and also from Pete Hegseth?
Well, Lucy, I think it's fair to say that this was fighting talk that we had from the US administration this morning. The US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said that this conflict and the attacks had only just begun. He said that we will take all the time needed to ensure success. I think it's worth pausing, firstly, on that point, because, of course, remember, President Trump, when he was candidate Trump on the campaign trail, had promised to end protracted foreign entanglements, concerns, for example, over so-called forever wars. And on that point, with regards to one of those forever wars, of course, in US history, that is Iraq. And the US Defense Secretary said that the US in this latest attack had used twice the air power that was used in Operation Shock and Awe, those initial intense strikes on Iraq in 2003, and essentially said that they will continue doing so, that these attacks are only just ramping up. Now, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said that so far the United States has been able to take out the Iranian Air Force, their Navy. That's not something that we've been able to independently verify as of yet. But I think all of this showing that we are seeing these conflicting statements when it comes to the potential longevity of this war, bearing in mind just a couple of days ago, we heard from President Trump speaking to a number of journalists in phone calls when he was saying something like 4 to 5 weeks. Now the Defense Secretary saying this conflict has only just begun.
And briefly, Helena, Pete Hegseth is saying Iran tried to kill President Trump, but he had the last laugh. Is that the first time we've heard that?
Well, of course, there had been an assassination attempt, and now we know that according to the US Defense Secretary, the person who was trying to carry that out was assassinated in those latest strikes. So that is the first update we have heard with regards to that coming from the Pentagon.
To you from Tel Aviv, where Israel and America's war with Iran has spilled across many more borders, escalating far beyond the Middle East. The US has now sunk in international waters an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka, and Turkey has been targeted by an Iranian missile. But it was the US Defense Secretary who announced a submarine torpedo had sunk the warship, the Iris Dina, around 25 miles south of the city of Gaul. More than 80 bodies have so far been found. It's thought 180 people were on board. It's the first US attack on Iranian forces outside the Middle East in this war. And NATO air defenses had to intercept an Iranian missile heading towards southern Turkey. There is a large US airbase nearby at Incirlik, which could have been the target, but that hasn't been confirmed. Elsewhere, Israel says it's launched a 10th wave of airstrikes on targets across Iran, and it's issued evacuation orders for more people to leave southern Lebanon as Hezbollah positions are attacked in the capital Beirut. A US-based human rights group now estimates that more than 1,000 Iranians have died in the war so far, some of them children. And the first UK government-chartered flight is due to leave Muscat in Oman in the next hour or so, evacuating Britons at a time when much of the airspace around the Gulf remains closed. Well, our first report tonight is from our international editor, Jeremy Bowen.
This was another demonstration of American military power and a stark message to the Iranians that nowhere is safe for them. The US submarine's torpedo smashed into the stern of the Iranian frigate Dana.
In the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II.
A first for the Americans, who released photos. In fact, 44 years before this attack on the Iranian ship, a Royal Navy submarine sank the Argentinian cruiser General Belgrano, one of the most controversial actions of the 1982 Falklands War. The Sri Lankan Navy brought 32 survivors ashore. It seems that the Americans have decided that they can hit Iranian targets worldwide. Some of the rescued Iranians were walking wounded, others more seriously hurt. The attack will raise more questions about the legality of America's claim that this is a war of self-defense. In 5 days of war, huge uncertainty about the future has been imposed on more than 90 million Iranians. Whatever their views on the regime, living in a city, a country that is being bombed, can reduce people's lives to a daily test of endurance. The traffic is moving in Tehran. Aspects of life are functioning. There are no doubts about America's capacity to destroy, but plenty about keeping its promises to help Iranians end years of authoritarian rule. There is no evidence of a coherent plan for what happens when the bombing stops, and increasing signs that the Iranian regime's ability to survive has been underestimated.
For the Iranian people, my heart breaks, truly. President Trump presented this as a historic generational opportunity, but it's actually looking like a historic generational disaster. The Iranian people in Iran have borne the price of the Islamic Republic's repressive capacity for 47 years, and I'm very worried that not only are they going to be left in a war-torn, devastated country with no economic prospects, but they will be facing further repression and brutality at the end of this war.
The Israelis released video of the view from one of their aircraft over Tehran. A missile circled in red sweeps past. Israel destroyed Iran's air defenses last year, which means the skies over Iran are wide open for Israeli and American pilots. Our colleagues at BBC Persian spoke to Iranians fleeing across the border to Turkey.
Honestly, people are completely stressed. The situation is critical. No one is really themselves. Because of the rising prices and everything that was already going on, people were already under a lot of pressure. And now that the war has started again, the situation has become even worse.
I was there for 1 month, but I feel like I aged 100 years. It was exhausting. It really wore me down.
Across the region, the war is still intensifying. In Lebanon, Iran's ally, Hezbollah, released a video of a drone attack. In what may be a separate incident, an Israeli tank inside Lebanon is circled and seems to take a direct hit. Israel, though, has much more firepower than Hezbollah since it scored a major victory over them in 2024. The health ministry in Beirut says more than 70 Lebanese have been killed in the last 2 days. Big questions for the whole Middle East now include: how long will this last, and what will it take to end it? No one has answers yet. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Well, after making that announcement about the sinking of that Iranian warship, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, declared more and larger waves of attack were coming and the Iranian regime a toast. Tom Bateman was at that briefing at the Pentagon today. Tom, what did you make of how officials see the progress of the campaign so far?
Well, I think the intention of the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, Clive, was to give a sense of overwhelming American and Israeli destructive force. He said that within days they would have completely uncontested control of the airspace and said that they would be picking out targets and, in his words, delivering death and destruction from the sky all day long. He also said they were putting the Iranian Navy at the bottom of the Gulf. Now, I also asked Mr. Hegseth in that briefing about the images we've seen of that building, a school in Minab that the Iranians say was struck on Saturday, killing, according to authorities there, more than 160 people, including many children. No one has yet taken responsibility for that, and I asked Mr. Hegseth what he knew.
Thank you. Tom Bateman with the BBC. Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look and investigating that. Red tie in front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
Now, one other potentially very significant incident, Clive, you've been talking about the fact that the Turkish Defence Ministry says NATO air systems shot down an Iranian ballistic missile heading towards Turkish airspace. That matters, of course. Turkey is a member of NATO. Mr. Hegseth was also asked about that and asked whether that incident could trigger NATO's Article 5, its Mutual Defence Pact. He said he was aware of the shooting down, but had no sense, as far as he was aware, that it could trigger an Article 5 clause from NATO.
Tom, thank you. Tom Bateman there live in Washington. Well, as we've been hearing, Israel has stepped up its military offensive in Lebanon. People living in towns and villages in the south of the country have been told to leave as Israeli troops move further beyond the border. The Iranian-backed group Hezbollah says its forces are in direct clashes with Israel. Well, Wira Davis is in the Lebanese capital Beirut for us. Wira, on this second front in the war, it seems the fighting is intensifying.
Yeah, indeed, Clive. I think there's a great deal of trepidation across Lebanon what the next few days will bring. Israel seems to be expanding the scope and scale of its military operations, not just focusing now on Hezbollah targets in parts of Beirut and in the south of the country. This morning we went to part of eastern Beirut where a hotel housing some Shia families had been apparently targeted by Israel. Also in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon, 7 people were killed in an apparent Israeli airstrikes. But I think the attention over the next few days is going to be focused on those areas in the south. We've heard from the UN body, which monitors the de facto border between Israel and Lebanon at UNIFIL, saying today that Israeli troops have now entered several villages close to the blue line. We've heard from Hezbollah sources that there's been fighting in a village several kilometers into Lebanon. And there's been that order from the IDF, the Israeli military, today for hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate most of southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and to head north for their own safety, because Israel clearly intends to enter, invade, if you like, southern Lebanon to deal with Hezbollah's rocket attacks into northern Israel and to perhaps finish with Hezbollah as a fighting force once and for all. But that does mean that in the next few days we're going to see the prospect of tens of thousands of people fleeing towns and villages from southern Lebanon further north towards relative safety. It's a very, very difficult time and a very worrying time, I think, for many, many people in Lebanon.
Indeed, that second front getting much more dangerous. Thank you. Wira Davis there live in Beirut. Well, since the conflict began on Saturday, the US military says it's hit nearly 2,000 targets in Iran, and Israel's Air Force says it's dropped more than 5,000 munitions. Now, with the war less than a week old, just what are the strategies and goals of the two sides? Gordon Carrera, the BBC security analyst, has been looking at how the war is being waged.
In the war's fifth day, the strategies the two sides are pursuing are becoming clearer. Each is seeking different ways to inflict damage and pressure on the other. The US and Israel have hit targets across Iran, including leadership figures like the Supreme Leader in the opening salvo, and military targets like air defense and missile launchers. They've also hit some of the security infrastructure that supports the regime, like this site in Tehran. The aim is to undermine Iran's ability to fight and especially to fire missiles, and perhaps open up the way for the regime to collapse or be overthrown. Iran's response has been to launch missiles and drones across the Gulf. It says it's primarily targeting US and allied military bases and facilities in neighbouring countries, but it's also tried to strike economic targets, including refineries and hotels, like this one in Dubai. Iran's aim is to inflict enough pain in terms of casualties and economic disruption to get Gulf states to pressure the US to back down. How much it has left in its arsenal, though, is unclear. Iran is also seeking to inflict pressure through the Straits of Hormuz. This is a narrow and vital shipping lane, less than 30 miles wide. About a fifth of the world's oil supply normally passes through here. Threats by Iran have led to its near closure. This tracker shows shipping the day before the war, when around 100 vessels a day passed through, and now when it's slowed to a trickle. The US says, if necessary, its navy could escort ships to prevent a serious economic crisis. In this war of attrition, can the US and Israel hunt down Iran's missiles and drones before they and Gulf allies run out of interceptors to shoot them down? And can Iran withstand the bombs and inflict enough pain to force the US and Israel to pull back? Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Sir Keir Starmer has defended the UK's response to the Iran conflict after criticism from Donald Trump for not allowing British military bases to initially be used for US airstrikes. The Prime Minister insisted it was crucial that the UK acted on a lawful basis and there was a viable thought-through plan for the conflict. Here's Chris Mason.
This is HMS Dragon, currently in Portsmouth. It's being loaded with ammunition and is expected to set off for waters near Cyprus next week. It can spot missiles and drones and is being sent to protect a British base on the island hit by a drone at the weekend.
The situation in the Middle East remains serious and volatile. This government will be resolute in our focus, protecting British lives, bringing our people home and safeguarding our national interest.
The Prime Minister has given America permission to take off from British runways on missions to bomb Iranian missile sites, but this hasn't happened yet. The Conservative leader wanted to know why the UK wasn't bombing those sites itself.
Iran is trying to kill our servicemen and women. He is catching arrows rather than stopping the archer. That's what we're talking about. Why is he asking our allies to do what we should be doing ourselves?
The Prime Minister didn't answer the question, but did set out what Britain is doing.
We're resupplying our air defence missiles today. Wildcat helicopters with anti-drone capabilities will be in Cyprus this week, and HMS Dragon will be deployed to the Mediterranean.
Then there is the potential economic impact of the war.
Experts are warning that families could see their energy bills rise by £500 a year as a result of Trump's illegal war. But millions of families and pensioners are already struggling to keep their heads above water thanks to years of a cost of living crisis.
Sir Keir said existing measures were cutting bills, but acknowledged how concerned many people are.
I was glad that we were able to bring energy price bills down by £150 announced just the other day. We will keep a very close eye on this. I do know how important it is for the British public.
And what of the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister?
This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
After those remarks yesterday, these today.
British jets are shooting down drones and missiles to protect American lives in the Middle East on our joint bases. That is the special relationship in action. Sharing intelligence every day to keep our people safe. That is the special relationship in action. Hanging on to President Trump's latest words is not the special relationship.
It'll be helicopters from this base near Yeovil in Somerset heading for Cyprus soon, armed with missiles capable of shooting down drones. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, it's in the next hour. The first government evacuation flight to bring British nationals home will take off from the Omani capital, Muscat. 8 more commercial flights are due to leave the United Arab Emirates. Hundreds of thousands of Brits who were stranded after war broke out are still trying to get home, and some have been getting in touch with BBC Your Voice, as Mark Ashdown now reports.
With thousands of flights grounded, for those stranded, the journey home remains unclear. Poppy's flight from Singapore to London was diverted to Oman on Saturday. She says after a 5-hour wait, passengers were taken by bus to a hotel.
That was on Saturday evening. It's now Wednesday evening, and I haven't heard anything from Qatar Airlines, and it's been impossible to contact them. Some other passengers have booked alternative flights home at their own expense, but I haven't done that because prices have absolutely skyrocketed.
She's hoping to get on the first government-chartered repatriation flight. Due to take off this evening, it's for British nationals, their spouse or partner, and under 18s. The Prime Minister said 130,000 people had been in contact to ask for help.
Yesterday, more than 1,000 British nationals arrived back in the UK on commercial flights from the UAE. A further 8 flights are due to leave the UAE to the UK today. I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, that the first charter flight is expected to leave Oman later today, and 2 more will come in the coming days.
Airspace over the Middle East remains severely restricted, with flights completely or partially suspended in about a dozen countries. It's causing problems for flight schedules globally. Katie contacted BBC Your Voice.
The Iranian regime has actively and intentionally facilitated the killings of Americans. They chant death to America and fund other radical terrorists who attack our country and are seeking to destroy Western civilization itself. These terrorists seized our embassy and took 66 Americans hostage in Tehran. They slaughtered 241 U.S. service members with a truck bombing in Beirut. They killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. And this is just a small fraction of their blood-soaked record. Prior leaders have been too weak and ineffective to address this threat. Some, like Barack Hussein Obama, even sent pallets of cash that ultimately financed this terrorist crusade against the United States and our people, while signing stupid and naive deals that put Iran on the path of developing nuclear bombs. After years of endless appeasement and empty statements from politicians on both sides of the political aisle in this town, President Trump is finally the man of action. President Trump is holding these monsters accountable and permanently extinguishing their nuclear ambitions. Future generations of Americans will look to this moment as the moment where the specter of a nuclear armed Iran ended. At the beginning of Operation Epic Fury, launched last weekend, President Trump laid out clear objectives to the American people on what the U.S. military seeks to accomplish through these major combat operations. Number 1, destroy the regime's deadly ballistic missiles and completely raze their missile industry to the ground. Number 2, annihilate the Iranian regime's navy. And so far, we have destroyed more than 20 Iranian ships, including their top submarine last night, using a torpedo for the first time since World War II. There is not a single Iranian ship underway in the Arabian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, or the Gulf of Oman. Number 3, Operation Epic Fury will ensure the regime's terrorist proxies in the region can no longer destabilize the region or the free world and attack our armed forces. And thus far, Iran's proxies are hardly putting up a fight. Number 4, this mission will guarantee that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. It's safe to say that thus far, Operation Epic Fury has been a resounding success. American forces have struck more than 2,000 targets, destroying hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles, launchers, and drones. As the Department of War said this morning, we expect to have complete and total dominance over Iranian airspace in the coming hours, clearing the skies for our brave warriors to continue achieving these noble and long sought after objectives. There's been a lot of misreporting and intellectual dishonesty from the American media on why President Trump decided to launch this operation. So let me remind you, Operation Midnight Hammer, which took place last June, obliterated Iran's 3 major nuclear sites. Yet the terrorist Iranian regime has remained fully committed to rebuilding its nuclear program. How do we know this? Because Iran has pursued this path of war and violence despite President Trump dispatching 2 of his top and most trusted negotiators to engage in exhaustive and good faith negotiations to try and reach a deal. And the world knows this president's preference is always peace and diplomacy first. Look no further than the 8 additional global conflicts he has ended in the past year as proof. Unfortunately, the terrorist Iranian regime refused to negotiate in good faith. They chose this path of violence and destruction, and they are reaping the consequences of their horrible decision. The regime did what they always have done. They lied, they delayed, they tried to string the United States of America along. They wanted to buy themselves time to continue building ballistic missiles and other deadly weaponry that could harm our U.S. personnel and troops in the region, and to continue aggressively pursuing their unacceptable nuclear ambitions. U.S. negotiators offered to lift crippling sanctions on Iran and even provide nuclear fuel to Iran at no cost to support a civil nuclear power program. They additionally had the opportunity to accept U.S. support as an investor in potential projects to develop peaceful nuclear energy together under a mutually agreed upon framework. Yet in response, Iran would have to forfeit their enrichment capacity once and for all. But Iran rejected. They accepted none of these generous and unprecedented offers by the United States. Simply put, they refused to say yes to peace. And their refusal made clear that their #1 priority was building a nuclear weapon with which to threaten the United States of America. Again, the country they have been chanting death to for nearly 5 decades. Let me state this again clearly. Iran rejected the path of peace because the terrorists in charge of this regime wanted to build nuclear weapons to use against Americans and our allies. President Trump made the determination, a courageous determination and decision, that the path the United States was on with Iran had only one outcome: massive death and destruction at the hands of a nuclear-armed terroristic regime. That path of death and destruction and threats against the American people have ended with Operation Epic Fury. Operation Epic Fury has forged a new path that will better ensure the security of the United States and our people. The terrorists made a bet that President Trump would be like many of his predecessors, that he would just talk and he would refuse to enforce his clear red lines. But that has proven to be a catastrophic error in judgment. When President Trump makes a threat, and I have reiterated that threat many times from this podium to all of you over the past year, President Trump does not bluff. The president's words are backed up by the mightiest warriors in the world who possess the most sophisticated capabilities this world has ever known. 49 and counting of the most senior Iranian regime leaders, including the supreme leader, have already been wiped off the face of the earth. Make no mistake, killing these brutal terrorists is good for America and makes the world a much safer place. I want to also extend our prayers and condolences to the families of the 6 U.S. military service members who have been lost in Operation Epic Fury. These heroes represent the very best among us. They laid down their lives in defense of our country, and we will never forget their legacy or their sacrifice. As the president said, we grieve for these American patriots and their families as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. President Trump intends to attend the dignified transfer of these American heroes to stand in grief alongside their families. I understand the Department of War is working on scheduling this transfer, and we will provide updates at the appropriate time. Finally, the Trump administration is also doing everything within our power to protect Americans in harm's way. Since the launch of Operation Epic Fury, more than 17,500 Americans have safely returned home from the Middle East, with over 8,500 American citizens returning home to the United States just yesterday alone. If you are a U.S. citizen in the Middle East looking to return to the United States, the Secretary of State asks that you please register with the State Department at step.state.gov. The State Department will identify where you are and provide travel options directly to you. The administration is already rapidly chartering flights free of charge and booking commercial options, which we expect to become increasingly available as time goes on and the success of this mission further comes to fruition. I know the President and Secretary of State Rubio have been in touch as well with our allies in the region directly about this problem, making it clear that it is a priority of the United States of America to bring every American home. The Trump administration will not rest until every American is home safely and until the terrorist threat from Iran has been completely destroyed. With that, I'll take your questions. Eric, why don't you kick us off today? Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, Iran's regime, its leadership has largely been decimated. We have a sense right now of who is actually calling the shots in Iran, and we're also hearing reports that the Supreme Leader's son may be named his successor. Do you have any more information about that? I just had a quick follow-up as well.
Sure. We've seen those reports as well, of course, and this is something that our intelligence agencies are closely monitoring and looking at. The truth is, we'll have to wait and see. The president has said repeatedly that the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are the 4 military objectives that I laid out for you previously, to destroy Iran's navy, to destroy their ballistic missile capacity, to ensure their proxies in the region can no longer harm Americans, and to also ensure that they can never obtain a nuclear weapon. As for what comes next for Iran, the president has said, of course, it's a good thing for the United States to want freedom for the Iranian people, and ultimately we hope that freedom rests in their hands.
Caroline, we see the Arab and Muslim nations coming under fire as well. President Trump's vision for the region has been to bring the Arab and Muslim nations to the table together, Abraham Accords, obviously, with Israel. If this regime topples, could we see a new day in the region and really a new Middle East come out of this when the dust settles?
Well, though the greatest deterrent to true and long-lasting peace in the Middle East has always been the rogue Iranian terrorist regime. And our Arab and Gulf partners in the nation admit that, as well as, of course, our close friend and ally Israel. We have seen all of the Arab partners in the region come together during this time on the phone with President Trump, many of them commending him for this bold and brave action to protect American troops and our bases in the region that are housed in many of these Arab and Gulf states. And I know that many of these regional partners are contributing their air defense capabilities as well. Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and the president continues to be engaged with all of them. Welcome. Garrett.
Also have two, if you'll humor me. Axios, I think, was the first to report this morning this phone call between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that Netanyahu had given the U.S. this information about where the Ayatollah would be and that he'd be with his deputies on Saturday. How important was that information in the president making the decision to strike where and when he did?
I think it was important with respect to the timeline, but I think the president, prior to that phone call, had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets and our personnel in the region. And the president was faced with a choice. Does the United States of America use our military and our capabilities to strike first, to take out this threat that has been threatening our country and our people for 47 years? Or is he going to, as commander-in-chief, sit back and watch as the rogue Iranian regime attacks our people in the region? That's obviously an unacceptable decision. For the second choice there is unacceptable to the president, which is why he made this decision. As for where the Ayatollah was going to be, that obviously had an impact on the timeline of the operation, but not quite the president's decision in its entirety.
And then on the way the public is viewing this, we were sitting here last week. I asked you if the president was going to make this a big part of the State of the Union, if he felt like he had to sell the possibility that he'd do strikes like this. We're now 5 days on. He hasn't done kind of the traditional speech to the nation part of it. Does the president believe the country supports the actions that he's taken?
So there's Caroline Levitt, the White House
I think the president knows the country is smart enough to read past many of the fake news headlines produced by people in this room that this action was unjustifiable. Again, this is a rogue terrorist regime that has been threatening the United States, our allies, and our people for 47 years. And the American people are smart enough to know that. And they've also been smart enough to listen to the president himself, not just over the past year in this second term, but during his first term as president, and also for the past 40 years of his life. This is a president who has been remarkably consistent on this issue, that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And the president tried peace through diplomacy exhaustively and extensively. He and his team gave it their best go, and the president ultimately came to the determination that peace was not a pursuable path. The Iranian regime, they want death, they want destruction, they want to kill Americans, and that's unacceptable to this president. It's intolerable to him as commander-in-chief. Jackie.
Thank you, Caroline. Obviously, seen the update from the State Department on the 17,500 Americans that have already come back, including some 8,000 just yesterday. There are still 6,000 that are looking to get out, as I understand it. And just in the context of what you just told Garrett about the president's decision on a timeline, if he had decided to do this strike before receiving, the specific intelligence about the meeting on Saturday, should there have been more done in advance of the strikes to try to get those Americans in the region resources and information to get home before day 3 of the war?
There was many signs put out by the State Department, and I wish that everyone in this room would report on them. The Secretary of State issued level 4 travel advisories dating back to January for many of these countries in the region. On January 14th, the U.S. mission to Saudi Arabia advised personnel and Americans to exercise increased caution and limit non-essential travel to any military installations. On February 11th, the U.S. Department of State Consular Affairs shared a list of countries with level 4 do not travel advisories. You can't be much more clear than that. Do not travel to these following countries. On February 23rd, the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon ordered non-emergency government personnel and family members to leave Lebanon due to safety risks, and we helped them do that. On March 2nd, the State Department urged U.S. citizens to depart Lebanon immediately. With respect to Iran, on February 27th, the Secretary designated Iran as a state of sponsor of wrongful detention and stated no American should travel to Iran for any reason. And again, on February 27th, the U.S. ambassador to Israel warned Americans to leave Iran, and they provided travel advisory alerts through the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. So the State Department was all hands on deck on advising extreme caution and do not travel alerts to Americans in the region. With respect to the Americans who are still in the region now, again, the State Department is asking that they register at the website so they can directly identify you, and we are actively and rapidly working to charter flights. There is some commercial flights that are taking off intermittently from these countries, and we plan to get Americans on board as quickly as possible, again, free of charge to them. And we have some additional measures that I think will be announced in the coming days. Again, I can also reiterate from the president's perspective, this is something he's brought up directly with our allies and partners in the region, that we expect their help in getting Americans home, and we will do that, and we will not rest until every single American is returned home safely.
Thank you. And then one follow-up just on how people might be experiencing this at home. With respect to the economy and the cost of oil spiking, is there a need to start those Navy escorts in the Strait of Hormuz now to sort of blunt the impact to people? And also, because Spain is a member of the EU, does that at all put a wrinkle in the president's plan for a trade embargo with that?
With respect to Spain, I think they heard the president's message yesterday loud and clear. And it's my understanding over the past several hours, they've agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military. And so I know that the U.S. military is coordinating with their counterparts in Spain. But the president expects all of our European allies, of course, to cooperate in this long sought after mission, not just for the United States, but also for Europe, to crush the rogue Iranian regime that, again, not only threatens America, but also threatens our European allies as well. With respect to oil prices and the economy here at home, of course, this is something that Secretary Bessent, Secretary Wright, the National Economic Council of Energy, that is led by Secretary Burgum, has been long working on and well in advance. Yesterday, President Trump announced the U.S. Development Finance Corporation will provide political risk insurance at a very reasonable price for crude carriers and cargo ships operating in and around the Gulf. And as you pointed out, Jackie, the president said, if necessary and when appropriate, the U.S. Navy will begin escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. I think it speaks to why this action was so necessary, that ultimately the energy industry is going to benefit from the president's actions with respect to Iran, because Iran will no longer be controlling the Strait of Hormuz and restricting the free flow of energy, which, as you all know, controls 20% of the world's global oil supply. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. The president said yesterday there wasn't time to make evacuation plans because this all happened so quickly. Given how critical the president has been of the chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan by the last administration 5 years ago, why wasn't there more of a focus on evacuation plans from the Middle East that could have been at least put in place, ready to go before the strikes this weekend?
Again, I just laid out for you that there have been plans in place and that the State Department has been very clear to the American people traveling within this region not to travel to these regions. We gave notices to leave immediately the countries where these Americans were within. And unlike the previous administration, we actually have a number. We actually have identified the number of people in the region who have requested help. We are in direct contact and engagement with them. And you have to keep in mind, there's a few thousand people who have requested assistance to come home in comparison to the millions who we understand are in the region. So we will help every single American who wants to come home if they're making that request of the State Department.
Americans who called the State Department hotline as recently as last night were being told, we can't help you, you have to make your own plans.
Well, the line was updated, and I expect every single person in this room to report on that accurately, so that information can be relayed appropriately to your audiences and to the American people. I think as journalists, you all have a responsibility to let them know that the line has been updated accordingly with the proper guidance, because I saw many people in this room very quick to do selfie videos with the line yesterday, but not so quick to report on the corrected message today. So that is something the administration quickly worked to address, and we have fixed that problem. However, we're also pointing to people to the website, again, to register so that we know exactly where you are. So when there are commercial flights moving into that area, when there are chartered flights moving into that area, we can get Americans on planes as quickly as possible.
Do you have any details on how many charter flights have been able to get out of the region so far with Americans on board?
I don't have an exact count for you, but I know that we're working on chartering many flights. As soon as we were doing it yesterday, we're doing it again today. And you should not expect us to detail exactly when these flights are taking off for obvious reasons. The Iranians have shown that they are not going to hesitate to target civilians in the region, which is completely intolerable. But for safety and security reasons, we're not going to be broadcasting when flights full of Americans are going to be taking off, obviously. Danny.
At the top there, you said that the Iranian regime is being absolutely crushed. Can you explicitly say then whether or not regime change is a goal of President Trump's operation?
The goals of this operation have been made very clear, Danny, and the president has said them in his speech when he launched this operation and released that video in the middle of the night to all of you and to the world. The stated military objectives of Operation Epic Fury are as follows: eliminate Iran's ballistic missile threat, destroy their naval capability, disrupt missile and drone production infrastructure, sever their pathway, and end their pathway to nuclear weapons. And I can report, as you all saw from the Pentagon today, that thus far this operation has been remarkably successful. Again, we're moving towards complete and total control of Iranian airspace. We have continuous 24/7 strike operations ongoing. We've had more than 2,000 targets that have been struck, nearly 2,000 munitions have been employed. The first 24 hours of this campaign were described nearly as twice the scale of the 2003 shock and awe campaign. And we've seen that the enemy, the Iranian rogue regime, their retaliatory strikes against the United States and the threat reduction has reduced significantly. If you look at the Iranian ballistic missile launches, they're down 86% from day one levels. So while the United States military continues to increase its complete dominance over this rogue regime, they are weakening day by day.
Regime change is not a phrase that you would want to use.
Again, Operation Epic Fury, I just detailed the goals and objectives of this very quickly. But obviously, as the president has said numerous times, do we want to see Iran being led by a rogue terrorist regime? No, of course not. So any day the United States of America is taking out a terrorist is a good day for our country and a good day for our people.
So, given that point that you just make about the United States wouldn't mind seeing the government overthrown, certainly President Trump has talked about wanting to see Iranians overthrow the government. Has the president considered at all kind of how he views a U.S. role, if any, in Iran post-conflict?
I think it's something the president is actively considering and discussing with his advisors and his national security team. But again, right now, the focus, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, is on ensuring the quick and effective success of Operation Epic Fury. Sure, go ahead.
I want to ask you about the U.S. munitions stockpile.
I don't even know who's speaking because I wasn't looking at you. You can ask a question and then I'll go to you.
I want to ask you about the U.S. munitions stockpile. President Trump posted on Truth Social on Monday that the U.S. still has a good supply of weapons, but that we're not where we need to be. What does he mean by that? And does President Trump then want to ask on Congress to pass a supplemental to increase funding for missile interceptor systems like the ones being used to defend U.S. bases in the Middle East from Iranian missiles?
I don't have any updates for you on congressional asks from the president. As you know, under this president, we have significantly increased our defense budget, which is a good thing for the United States, for our national security, and for protecting our homeland. With respect to munitions, ammunition, weapon stockpiles, the United States of America has more than enough capability to not only successfully execute Operation Epic Fury, but to go much further. And we have weapon stockpiles in places that many people in this world don't even know about. However, the president in that post was pointing out that unfortunately, we had a very stupid and incompetent leader in this White House for 4 years who gave away many of our best weapons for nothing, for free, to another country very far away by the name of Ukraine. So the president was pointing out how that was an unwise decision, but nevertheless, don't doubt the strength and the might of the American military. And I will also add, President Trump has rightfully been calling on defense contractors in this country to rapidly and aggressively produce American-made weapons because they are the best in the world, and the president always likes to get things done as quickly as possible, and so he's been quite vocal in his efforts to try to speed up our defense industry to protect our homeland. Go ahead.
Caroline, could you tell us about the president's current thinking about ground troops and whether they could be used if they were to be sent into Iran? What would they be used for? What's the situation?
Well, they're not part of the plan for this operation at this time, but I certainly will never take away military options on behalf of the President of the United States or the Commander-in-Chief, and he wisely does not do the same for himself. I know there's many leaders in the past who like to take options off of the table without having a full understanding of how things could develop. So again, it's not part of the current plan, but I'm not going to remove an option for the President that is on the table. Sean.
Hey, did the United States airstrike a girls' elementary school and kill 175 people?
Not that we know of, Sean, and the Department of War is investigating this matter, and I would just tell you very strongly, the United States of America does not target civilians, unlike the rogue Iranian regime that targets civilians, that kills children, that has killed thousands of their own people in the past several weeks, and uses propaganda quite effectively. And unfortunately, many people in this room have fallen for that propaganda. So I would caution you from pointing the finger at the United States of America when it comes to targeting civilians, because that's not something that these armed forces do. Reagan.
Thanks, Caroline. Prior to the Iran conflict, the SAVE Act was really the focus of the news cycle. Is the SAVE Act still a priority for the administration?
Absolutely.
Can you just provide an update on the administration's talks with Congress to get the SAVE Act through?
SAVE Act is absolutely still a priority for this president and the administration. The focus, of course, of much of the president's time right now is on ensuring the success of Operation Epic Fury, but the president can walk and chew gum at the same time, and he's very much continuing to focus on the issues that matter here at home for the American people, including the passage of the SAVE Act, including on bringing down the cost of living, which is why you'll see the president in about an hour and a half at the Ratepayer Protection Pledge Roundtable, where he will be sitting with big tech companies, with AI companies who are building in communities across the country and have pledged to pick up the cost of the electricity tab in these small towns and communities across the country, which is a great thing for American consumers. So you'll be hearing from the president directly on this very important domestic agenda item later this afternoon. And it's something that he mentioned in his State of the Union address. So check it off the list as another promise made and kept by this president. Sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. I just wanted to get back to Danny's question. So those 4 objectives that you read out do not explicitly include regime change. If those objectives were achieved and the Islamic Republic still existed, would that be an acceptable outcome?
That's a hypothetical question that I'm not going to engage in. Again, right now, the president and the commander-in-chief are focused on executing the success of Operation Epic Fury, which we are already doing so in a very tremendous and impressionable way. Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. 2 questions. The Trump administration reportedly is considering arming Kurdish forces in the hopes of inspiring a popular uprising in Iran. Could you comment on that report?
I can comment on the fact that the president has held many calls with partners, allies, and leaders in the region, in the Middle East. He did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq. But as for any report suggesting that the president has agreed to any such plan is completely false and should not be written.
President Trump was saying yesterday that he is okay with someone from within taking over in Iran. He spoke about how Venezuela he saw as a successful model where Delcy Rodriguez took over and had a better relationship. Iran's President Pezeshkian, he took office in 2024 as a relative reformer. He's part of a 3-man council now replacing the supreme leader. Does President Trump see him as a potential successor who is more pliable?
Again, that's another hypothetical, and I haven't spoken to the president about this specific individual, so I don't want to get ahead of him on any assessments that should be made.
Thank you. Yesterday, the president acknowledged that oil prices will be a bit high. As for gas prices here in the U.S., what is the admin doing right now to counter that? I mean, should they skyrocket? Is there a plan to help, Americans right now with those higher gas prices? And then a second question, on the rash that was on the president's neck, the White House physician said it was a preventative skin cream that he was using, but why is the president using this cream? What are they trying to prevent with this cream?
To your second question, I don't have anything additional to add to the physician statement that we provided to all of you on those questions, but I know the statement said that the redness on the neck will dissipate within the next couple of weeks. To your first question about oil prices, thank God we have a president who has exuded American energy dominance over the past year, and an administration that is wholeheartedly focused on keeping prices stable as best as we can. Of course, this operation is temporary to protect the homeland, but crude oil prices did fall yesterday. They remain stable today after the president announced steps to ensure the stability in global energy markets. Again, those include the DEC offering reasonably priced political risk insurance and the potential for the U.S. Navy to provide protection for the flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. It is the president's belief and his economic team's belief that the economy continues to be very strong. It's robust and will be able to weather any of the temporary impacts of Operation Epic Fury. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Just to follow up to that, the timeline for making the Strait of Hormuz safe for oil tankers to transport their oil through the strait, what is that timeline, and what can the president do to speed up that timeline?
I don't want to commit to a timeline, but certainly it's something that is being calculated actively by both the Department of War and the Department of Energy. They're working very closely. Both secretaries are in all of the briefings on this subject with the president, and this is, again, something they're monitoring. And if and when necessary, the United States Navy will provide assistance to escort oil tankers through the strait. Sure, in the blue.
Thank you, Caroline.
You're not in blue, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess you are, sort of. I'll go to you after.
You had mentioned about the commercial aircraft being used for the evacuations. What about the use of military aircraft? Would that happen in conjunction with
Correct.
That or subsequent to?
That is something that is definitely underway. And of course, we're going to use that in conjunction. We want as many planes, whether they're chartered, commercial, or military, taking Americans out of the Middle East and returning them safely home. So yes. Andrew, go ahead. You're welcome.
At the top of the briefing, you listed a long list of grievances against the Iranian government, going back to the takeover of the embassy in '79, barracks bombing in the '80s, etc. But no one from the administration has laid out the imminent threat that was supposed to be taken care of by this. And the rationales offered by, say, Secretary Rubio, the President's National Security Advisor, said that the threat was retaliation against American interests from Iran after Israeli strikes. The President says it was his own feeling that Iran was going to attack. Why is it that across the administration you can't say what the imminent threat against the United States was that required us to launch this? And also, Prime Minister Starmer told Parliament today that his reason that he didn't allow the use of British bases was that he was not satisfied that there was a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. Was there an attempt to provide the UK government with a legal basis for these strikes and a viable, thought-through plan?
To the first question, I completely reject the premise of your question. You have had the President of the United States, the Secretary of War, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and now I am out here today to explain to you exactly what led the President to make the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury. And President Trump does not make these decisions in a vacuum. This decision to launch this operation was based on a cumulative effect of various direct threats that Iran posed to the United States of America, and the President's feeling based on fact that Iran does pose an imminent and direct threat to the United States of America, based on the fact that they are the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, based on the fact that they were rapidly and aggressively building up their ballistic missile program to give themselves immunity within their country alongside their Navy, so that inside their country they could continue to create nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, which would of course pose a risk to Americans in the region and even Americans one day here at home. And then another point on this is the President found that through these extensive, exhaustive, failed negotiations with Iran, that they were hell-bent on death and destruction. So again, the President was not going to be just another president on a very long list who sat back and stood by and passed the buck of this direct threat to the next administration. The President had a feeling, again, based on fact, that Iran was going to strike the United States, was going to strike our assets in the region, and he made a determination to launch Operation Epic Fury based on all of those reasons. And I would like the media to actually report on all of them, rather than just picking sound bites from one person in this administration and saying, oh, they're contradicting the other person. No, again, these decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made by the President's feeling that Iran was going to strike the United States and our assets in the region, and he was not going to sit back and watch that happen. The determination was made that the President was going to strike first alongside Israel, and that has obviously been proven to be the right decision and an effective one at that. Libby, go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. A two-part question for you here. First, has the President spoken with the family members of those U.S. service members that were killed? Second, given what you've outlined throughout this entire briefing, I mean, the United States has sunk a bunch of Navy ships. We've hit all of these targets. What can Americans expect the goal to be moving forward now that the U.S. has accomplished all of this? What is victory, given we've even taken out Iran's supreme leader? That was an explicit goal.
Again, a victory will be determined by the Commander-in-Chief once the goals and the objectives that we have repeatedly laid out are fully realized. Again, we just, in the next few hours, will be achieving that dominance over the skies, which means the United States military will be raining missiles and weapons down on Iran to hit these specific targets that have been identified as crucial to take out by the Department of War. John.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Has the U.S. posture changed in regard to a nuclear North Korea, given the latest strikes on Iran and the fact that the stated goal is to make sure that Iran is not a nuclear country?
I don't have any change in position with respect to North Korea today.
Thank you. A quick follow-up. There's been reports that Ali Khamenei's son has been elected as the next supreme leader. Does the administration think that he is a part of the same regime as his father? Would they like people in the country to rise up and get him out of
There's
power?
reports he's been elected or that he's assuming to be elected. One of the likely options.
Pardon me, what was that?
That he's one of the likely options or that he has been elected. Okay, so we'll wait to confirm until someone actually is elected.
You just mentioned that the president is going to attend the dignified transfer for these families. Given what Secretary Hegseth said this morning, is it the position of this administration that the press should not prominently cover the deaths of U.S. service members?
No, it's the position of this administration that the press in this room and the press across the country should accurately report on the success of Operation Epic Fury and the damage it is doing to the rogue Iranian regime that has threatened the lives of every single American in this room. If the Iranian regime had their choice, they would kill every single person in this room. And so we can all be very grateful that we have an administration and that we have men and women in our armed forces who are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the rest of us in this room and for every American across the country and for every troop that is based in the Middle East. That's what these...
Secretary Hegseth was complaining that it was front page news about these 6 service members who were killed.
That's not what the secretary said, Caitlin, and that's not what the secretary meant, and you know it. You know you are being disingenuous. There is not, we've never had a secretary of defense who cares more.
Get through where tragic things happen. It's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad.
Yeah,
As you know, we cover the deaths of U.S. service members under every president.
The press does only want to make the president look bad. That's a fact. Especially you. No, listen to me. Especially you and especially CNN. And the Secretary of Defense cares deeply about our war fighters and our men and women in uniform. He travels all across this country to meet with them, to connect with them, and your network has hardly ever probably reported on that. You also had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Chairman Kane, who's a brave patriot, standing alongside the secretary at the Pentagon this morning, again expressing his condolences to these families. And I just told you that the President of the United States will be attending their dignified transfer. So please,
That's not making the president look bad. That's showcasing that.
We expect you to cover that as you should. We expect you to cover that as you should, Caitlin. But you and your network know that you take every single thing this administration says and tries to use it to make the president look bad. That is an objectable fact.
I don't think covering troop deaths is trying to make
if you're trying to argue right now that CNN's overwhelming coverage is not negative of President Donald Trump, I think the American people would tend to agree, and your ratings would tend to disagree with that as well. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. On the school strike, back to that for a minute. I understand that the U.S. does not target civilian infrastructure. That's what you said. Can you say that there's any evidence right now that it was not a U.S. strike? And then also, you didn't mention Israel in that. Is there any assessment about Israel's potential likely role in that, if at all?
Again, the Department of War is currently investigating this matter, but again, I will reaffirm that the Department of War and the United States Armed Forces do not target civilians, as does the Iranian regime, who kill and execute their own people. Christian.
Two separate issues, Caroline. First, what can you tell us about the military operation in Ecuador? And then secondly, is the president considering invoking the Defense Production Act to boost munition stockpiles while we are in this conflict?
It's not something I've heard the president consider, but as you know, the president has been in pretty direct correspondence and public correspondence with defense contractors, asking them to aggressively speed up their manufacturing of American-made weapons, which again are the best in the world. With respect to Ecuador, I would point you back to the statement released by the U.S. Southern Command. On March 3rd, Ecuadorian and U.S. military forces launched operations against designated terrorist organizations. These operations are a powerful example of the commitment of partners in Latin America and the Caribbean to combat the scourge of narco-terrorism. And together, we are taking decisive action to confront narco-terrorists who have long inflicted terror, violence, and corruption on citizens throughout the hemisphere. And with on that, I would also add that this weekend, I'm pleased to announce the president will welcome the heads of state from 12 nations across our Western Hemisphere in Miami, Florida. Florida on Saturday. The point of this newfound Latin America summit is to promote freedom, security, and prosperity in our region. The following countries will be in attendance: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, Trinidad and Tobago, and maybe some others as well. And the president will be speaking with the leaders of this country who have really formed a historic coalition to work together to address criminal narco-terrorist gangs and cartels and counter illegal and mass migration into not only the United States, but the Western Hemisphere, which remains a key and top priority of this president. Thank you very much, everyone. And you'll see the president yourselves in an hour.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Caroline.
And Turkey has been targeted by an Iranian missile. Well, the Pentagon released footage of a US submarine firing on an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean and sinking it. The Sri Lankan foreign minister says at least 80 people were killed, more than 30 rescued. We'll have more on the other developments in a moment, but first, a UK repatriation flight from Oman's capital, Muscat, is due to leave around now. Let's go live to our correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher, who's in Doha. So, Barbara, what do we know about this flight?
Well, this is the first evacuation flight that the UK government has organized to repatriate citizens who are trapped in the Middle East, travelers, tourists, expats who want to return to the UK. They're prioritizing vulnerable citizens, they said. And as you mentioned, it's leaving from Oman. And Oman is accessible from the United Arab Emirates by road. It's a 300-mile journey from Dubai. An airport that is actively open and flying every day. So that's why they've chosen Oman. I think that Britain is not expecting that all of the citizens who registered, 138,000 of them, will be evacuated in flights like this one. The Foreign Secretary said that they were speaking to airlines to try to prioritize British nationals on existing flights. And there are some existing flights, including from the United Arab Emirates, very limited numbers, but people get put on waiting lists and they are kind of trickling out bit by bit, and the government is hoping to accelerate that.
And Barbara, let's look at the causes of this, of course. The Iranian strikes on countries like the UAE and Qatar, Bahrain. What is the latest on those strikes?
Well, the strikes continue today. United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Kuwait, they all reported incoming fire. And Saudi Arabia also, another drone targeting its main oil refinery. No damage happened this time, but the refinery is still shut down from a previous attack, which just highlights how disrupted the oil and gas industry is. And the Iranians seem to be aware of how angry the Arabs are at what they're doing. Senior Iranian officials today spoke out and tried to downplay the attacks on their neighbors. They said they respected their sovereignty, but they were simply trying to defend their country against the U.S. and Israel. The Qatari foreign minister was having none of it. He called his Iranian counterpart for the first time since the conflict started, and he basically said that the Iranians were trying to draw the Arab countries into a war that was not their own, and they must stop it immediately. So that's the message that's being sent in many ways by the Arab capitals to Iran. But the Iranians have continued their strikes, and some of the statements made today by the Pentagon officials in their press conference, and also by other officials watching the war, is that perhaps the number of attacks are decreasing, suggesting that munitions are also decreasing. But at the same time, Iran still has quite a lot of a stockpile of weapons, and so we'll see for how long this goes on.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, we've heard from people all over the world who are holidaying across the region and found their flights cancelled, other major airports closed, of course. Many have faced growing uncertainty in trying to work out how to get out of the region. Organising safe evacuation routes isn't straightforward. We can speak now to Tom Hill, Abu Dhabi, who's organised recent repatriation flights out of the region. Thanks for coming on the programme.
Hi, Lewis. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. What are some of the challenges right now, then?
The challenge is a very dynamic and situation here at the moment, and as you can appreciate, a very unsettling few days for everyone involved. The situation has been and is changing hourly, but most importantly, our team in Abu Dhabi and Dubai are safe. We're actively supporting groups and individuals from the Gulf to get home, but as you say, there's a lot of operational variables here. Airspace can be closed at short notice, and so can airports. So we have to make people aware that these are the operational challenges that the Victor team are currently facing.
And so there are flights getting off the ground and getting people out. What have you been involved in?
That's exactly right. So when everything started around midday local time on Saturday, the team here identified the two best airports, if you like, that we could use at that time, which were Muscat in Oman and Riyadh. So we then went to speak to our partner airlines in the region and in Europe to see who can get aircraft to the region, who is able to, with insurance considerations and things like this, then understand how we can actively put that into play and get people home in a safe and timely manner.
So you're using those airports, you are getting people out, and there are a kind of slow drip of flights. What kind of timescale are you working on for things to not perhaps get back to normal, but pick up to be able to get all those people who want to leave out?
It's the timescale at the moment. I'll give you a live example from Sunday. We had a flight confirmation around Sunday night from Saudi Arabia, and that aircraft was wheels up around midday on Tuesday, so around a 36-hour lead time. Just want to advise people, if people are telling you we can get you out now and ASAP, please double check that, because there's a lot of information flying around. Not all of it is factual, and it's really important to deal with the facts. So I would plan based on the availability of the aircraft, because that is changing as well by the hour. A realistic time frame, if you're looking to arrange a charter flight, is around 36 to 48 hours.
Tom Hill, really appreciate you coming on the programme and talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Next, Israel says it's launched a 10th wave of airstrikes on targets across Iran, and it's issued evacuation orders for more people to leave southern Lebanon as Hezbollah positions are attacked in the capital Beirut. A US-based human rights group now estimates more than 1,000 Iranians have died in the war so far, some of them children. Here's our international editor, Jeremy Bowen.
This was another demonstration of American military power and a stark message to the Iranians that nowhere is safe for them. The US submarine's torpedo smashed into the stern of the Iranian frigate Dana.
In the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II.
A first for the Americans, who released photos. In fact, 44 years before this attack on the Iranian ship, a Royal Navy submarine sank the Argentinian cruiser General Belgrano, one of the most controversial actions of the 1982 Falklands War. The Sri Lankan Navy brought 32 survivors ashore. It seems that the Americans have decided that they can hit Iranian targets worldwide. Some of the rescued Iranians were walking wounded, others more seriously hurt. The attack will raise more questions about the legality of America's claim that this is a war of self-defense. In 5 days of war, huge uncertainty about the future has been imposed on more than 90 million Iranians. Whatever their views on the regime, living in a city, a country that is being bombed, can reduce people's lives to a daily test of endurance. The traffic is moving in Tehran, aspects of life are functioning. There are no doubts about America's capacity to destroy, but plenty about keeping its promises to help Iranians end years of authoritarian rule. There is no evidence of a coherent plan for what happens when the bombing stops, and increasing signs that the Iranian regime's ability to survive has been underestimated.
For the Iranian people, my heart breaks, truly. President Trump presented this as a historic generational opportunity, but it's actually looking like a historic generational disaster. The Iranian people in Iran have borne the price of the Islamic Republic's repressive capacity for 47 years, and I'm very worried that not only are they going to be left in a war-torn, devastated country with no economic prospects, but they will be facing further repression and brutality at the end of this war.
The Israelis released video of the view from one of their aircraft over Tehran. A missile circled in red sweeps past. Israel destroyed Iran's air defenses last year, which means the skies over Iran are wide open for Israeli and American pilots. Our colleagues at BBC Persian spoke to Iranians fleeing across the border to Turkey.
Honestly, people are completely stressed. The situation is critical. No one is really themselves. Because of the rising prices and everything that was already going on, people were already under a lot of pressure. And now that the war has started again, the situation has become even worse.
I was there for 1 month, but I feel like I aged 100 years. It was exhausting. It really wore me down.
Across the region, the war is still intensifying. In Lebanon, Iran's ally, Hezbollah, released a video of a drone attack. In what may be a separate incident, an Israeli tank inside Lebanon is circled and seems to take a direct hit. Israel, though, has much more firepower than Hezbollah since it scored a major victory over them in 2024. The health ministry in Beirut says more than 70 Lebanese have been killed in the last 2 days. Big questions for the whole Middle East now include how long will this last and what will it take to end it? No one has answers yet. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Around the world, across the UK, this is BBC News. This is BBC News. Now, after making the announcement about the sinking of the Iranian warship, the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared more and larger waves of attack were coming, and the Iranian regime is toast. Well, Tom Bateman was at that briefing at the Pentagon and questioned Mr. Hegseth.
Thank you. Tom Bateman with the BBC. Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look at investigating that. Red tie in front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
Caroline Levitt took questions from journalists a short while ago. She provided an update.
The stated military objectives of Operation Epic Fury are as follows: eliminate Iran's ballistic missile threat, destroy their naval capability, disrupt missile and drone production infrastructure, sever their pathway, and end their pathway to nuclear weapons. And I can report, as you all saw from the Pentagon today, that thus far this operation has been remarkably successful. Again, we're moving towards complete and total control of Iranian airspace. We have continuous 24/7 strike operations ongoing. We've had more than 2,000 targets that have been struck. Nearly 2,000 munitions have been employed. The first 24 hours of this campaign were described nearly as twice the scale of the 2003 shock and awe campaign. And we've seen that the enemy, the Iranian rogue regime, their retaliatory strikes against the United States and the threat reduction has reduced significantly. If you look at the Iranian ballistic missile launches, they're down 86% from day one levels. So while the United States military continues to increase its complete dominance over this rogue regime, they are weakening day by day.
Let's speak to our North America correspondent, Helena Humphrey. Now, Helena, you were listening across those words. What do we get from that briefing?
Well, it's a pretty strong tone from the White House press secretary. Remember, this is the first time that we have heard from Caroline Leavitt since the start of this war. She was seeking to tout this operation as a success, saying that she believed the US would have dominance over the Iranian skies. In the next couple of hours, she went on to say, she was repeating a number of times the purported aims of this war when it comes to the destruction of missiles, the Navy, stopping proxies in the region, ultimately stopping Iran's ability to ever possess a nuclear weapon. But she was asked a number of times from reporters in the room, is this about regime change? Is this a regime change war? She wouldn't commit to that. And remember, previously, at the outset of this war, President Trump had called on the Iranian people to rise up, to topple the regime. With regards to the justification, the reasoning for this war, she said that there had been a phone call between the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and President Trump, and that when they had discussed the threat from Iran, including historical actions going back to 1979, the role of proxies in the region, and the possibility for a nuclear weapon, President Trump was left, quote unquote, with a good feeling that Iran would attack US assets in the region, prompting him to join Israel in launching this war. Just another precision I want to bring you. We had that clip from Tom Bateman when he was asking at the Pentagon if there was more detail about that strike on a girls' school in Iran. Caroline Leavitt was asked about that. She was asked, did the US launch that strike? She said, not that we know of, we are investigating, and emphasized that the US, she said, did not target civilians.
Hannah, thank you very much for clarifying that for us. Just briefly, did we get any sense from Caroline Leavitt about what the next steps will be here?
Well, essentially, this is about air superiority, continuing to gain air superiority in the next few hours so that they continue those strikes to destroy all of Iran's military assets. Essentially, Pete Hegseth also saying that they will continue to rain down death and destruction, he had said, in the coming days.
Helena, thank you very much for that. Well, the conflict between Iran, Israel and the US is spreading across the Middle East and into Cyprus, of course, an EU nation. Earlier, US issued a travel warning for the country over a potential threat of armed conflict. This comes after a British naval base was hit by a drone attack on Monday, and the Cypriot president had to cancel an informal meeting of EU affairs ministers. Well, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Britain would deploy the destroyer HMS Dragon to assist Cyprus, while President Emmanuel Macron announced France would send a frigate and air defence systems to the island. Well, with threats mounting, let's hear from the Cypriot High Commissioner to the UK, Dr. Kyriakos Kouros. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Good evening, Luis. Thank you.
How safe are people in Cyprus feeling right now?
The sense now is that the people are worried. Because at first glance, for somebody who doesn't live in the area, you think that this crisis, that perpetual crisis that we are living in the southeast, in the Middle East, is something that happens always. But here we have new developments. It's the first time that we have a British base hit in Cyprus. Somebody could with institutional memory could tell you, but in 1986 there was a terrorist attack. Ignore it. The fact is that we have a drone attacking and hitting successfully British bases. The British bases, we have to understand, are not only British personnel. The majority of the population who live within the bases are Cypriots, right? So
this is a direct threat to Cypriots.
Exactly.
They've already been attacked once. What do you make of the speed of the UK response? Because yes, help is on its way, as was announced yesterday, but it's not going to be there till next week. Is that just too slow?
Well, we can say the following. For the last 3 days, we had a very hectic political engagement. We have the Prime Minister talking to my President twice, on Sunday and on Tuesday. We had the Foreign Secretary and the Minister responsible for Cyprus talking directly also with my Foreign Minister. We even have the National Security Advisors talking among themselves. And the British Secretary, if I'm not wrong, he is going to Cyprus tomorrow. So at least we have the engagement necessary for decisions to be taken and for...
But is it too slow?
Well, Cypriots are very practical people. We already engage other allies. We have Greece, which has sent us 2 frigates. They arrived on the island, and 4 aircrafts, F-15, if I remember correctly, and they are already in operation on the island. You mentioned before the French are arriving. Well, judging about the pace of the developments on behalf of the British, you have to judge on yourself. Of course, the Prime Minister said that they are sending helicopters, Wildcats, which have capabilities to deal with drones. I don't know when they are arriving. I think by the end of the week, I hope. It's an improvement of the situation as it was 3 days ago, right? And this engagement now is more substantial.
So it wasn't substantial enough at the beginning?
I'm a diplomat. I have to be very careful with my words. But to be frank, I was feeling a bit frustrating the past weeks because I was repeating my request on behalf of my government that we have to expedite a bit the processes on the issue at large. And don't forget, Cyprus is not a part of the conflict. Cyprus, for the last 2 decades, has invested heavily, branding itself as a humanitarian hub, where evacuations are facilitated, where humanitarian aids are offered.
Well, just on exactly that, if the UK is drawn more into this conflict alongside the US and Israel, does that A, put your people directly at threat, and B, does it risk undermining that reputation of yours?
A conflict of this nature, as I said, the only unprecedented element it had this time, it was that the British bases were hit. And the British bases is not just a room where British personnel exist. It's about both of them occupy less than 100 square miles of land. And within these areas, we have Cypriot villages with Cypriot citizens trying to live their ordinary life. This ordinary life has been disrupted since Sunday. So from Britain, we expect to take the necessary measures. It was obvious from the beginning that ballistic missiles capacities to defend the bases from ballistic missiles didn't exist. And actually, it's the Republic of Cyprus which provides this kind of safety. Okay. But on drones, we need more capacities, both us and the British bases there.
And what about the flip side of that, saying if you have a base on your island, if you live close to a base, if you work on a base, you know the risks. These are the risks of having that there.
Well, I have to acknowledge that the bases are not there by accident. They are part of the Treaty of the Establishment of the Republic of Cyprus. But the understanding was that we have to always be engaged on a dialogue to what extent these bases can develop their capacities, and what will be the ultimate purpose of their existence there. Because if they become part of the problem, if they are becoming part of conflicts, if they are a magnet of threats, and you do not have the capacity to either protect the bases and the island on itself, then something is not done right here.
Okay. Dr. Kyriakos Kouros, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you.
Same here. Bye.
Right, just to bring you right up to speed with some of the live feeds we have coming into us here, some of the live pictures. Let's show you some of the nighttime skylines we have covered at the moment. So this is Beirut. We have been monitoring these images over the last hour or so, 90 minutes that we've been on air. We've also had Doha, the skyline there. And finally, too, we have the skyline over Jerusalem. We'll be keeping you right up to date with all the latest developments. Do stay with us. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News.
صابر
This is BBC News, the headlines. The US torpedoes an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka, killing more than 80 people. 60 are still missing. Thousands more Britons prepare to evacuate the Middle East after enduring days of disruption and cancelled flights. And Iran continues to fire back, with strikes reported across the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Qatar. Iranian missiles and drones are shot down as they head towards countries like Turkey, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Well, since Saturday, the US military says it's hit nearly 2,000 targets in Iran, and Israel's Air Force says it's dropped more than 5,000 munitions. With no sign of the conflict losing heat, just what is the strategy and goals of the two sides? BBC security analyst Gordon Carrera has been looking at how the war is being waged.
In the war's fifth day, the strategies the two sides are pursuing are becoming clearer. Each is seeking different ways to inflict damage and pressure on the other. The US and Israel have hit targets across Iran, including leadership figures like the supreme leader in the opening salvo, and military targets like air defense and missile launchers. They've also hit some of the security infrastructure that supports the regime, like this site in Tehran. The aim is to undermine Iran's ability to fight and especially to fire missiles, and perhaps open up the way for the regime to collapse or be overthrown. Iran's response has been to launch missiles and drones across the Gulf. It says it's primarily targeting US and allied military bases and facilities in neighbouring countries, but it's also tried to strike economic targets, including refineries and hotels, like this one in Dubai. Iran's aim is to inflict enough pain in terms of casualties and economic disruption to get Gulf states to pressure the US to back down. How much it has left in its arsenal, though, is unclear. Iran is also seeking to inflict pressure through the Straits of Hormuz. This is a narrow and vital shipping lane, less than 30 miles wide. About a fifth of the world's oil supply normally passes through here. Threats by Iran have led to its near closure. This tracker shows shipping the day before the war, when around 100 vessels a day passed through, and now when it's slowed to a trickle. The US says if necessary, its navy could escort ships to prevent a serious economic crisis. In this war of attrition, can the US and Israel hunt down Iran's missiles and drones before they and Gulf allies run out of interceptors to shoot them down? And can Iran withstand the bombs and inflict enough pain to force the US and Israel to pull back? Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, we can speak now to Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. Thank you for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me, Louis.
A pleasure. So earlier on, the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said he wouldn't involve the UK in a war without a lawful basis, which seems to suggest that you and the US have started a war without a legal basis. Is that right?
Absolutely not. I beg to differ about this assumption. We have an ongoing conflict with the Iranian regime. They have targeted the Israelis for decades. American targets tried to assassinate the US president twice. And by the way, I would remind my colleagues in the UK that they also conducted illegal activities in the UK. So when you have a regime that supports terror and attacks Israelis and Americans, it's part of an ongoing conflict. And that's why we are continuing this conflict. But this time, we are not playing defense. This time we are pushing back, and this time we are winning.
So is Keir Starmer just wrong?
Absolutely wrong. Absolutely.
If that definition of what is legal in your eyes, and that this is a lawful basis for a war, why doesn't Keir Starmer accept that? And why don't plenty of other international observers accept that?
Well, we know that there are different interests for different leaders, for different countries. But when you look at what's happening today, when Iran is lashing attacks against European countries, Turkey, Cyprus, maybe the UK will be next. And you see what they are doing in the Gulf, attacking the allies of the US and the UK, by the way. Many important countries in the region. One should ask himself, for what some of the European leaders are waiting? Are they waiting for the drones or the rockets to reach their shores, and then they will decide it's about time to lend a hand? We expect more from democracies. And when we see, and I want to stress this point, you see the attacks of Iran against the moderate Arab countries, they're acting out of panic, out of desperation. It is a dangerous regime, and that's why we are committed to finish the job.
Yeah, people can accept that it's a dangerous regime. People can accept many of the things that they've done, but two things can be true at the same time. People can also say, but we're democracies. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in international law. We believe in international cooperation. You have a US president who didn't go through his Congress. You have two nations, you and the US, unilaterally launching these strikes. So people can agree with your description of Iran and also completely disagree with what you're doing, can't they?
I don't buy it. I respect the rule of law. In Israel and the US, I would say, a stronger democracy than some of the countries you refer to. And the fact that we have a threat, and we know that the Iranians have the capabilities, we see the ballistic missiles flying all over. So you cannot argue with me, Luis, that they don't have ballistic missile capabilities. And the second stage would be to actually assemble nuclear warheads to those ballistic missiles. We chose not to wait for that moment. We chose to take action before they achieve the point of no return.
I see. Does that mean, exactly on that, does that mean, is there a shift? Is effectively the old rules-based order, institutions like the United Nations are effectively gone now? Because what you're describing is that might is right. If you have the ability to preemptively go in there and stop them from doing X, Y, and Z, then that is what you should be doing. And that is the definition almost of might is right, isn't it?
No, I beg to differ also with this assumption. We expected more from the international community. We saw how for so many years the Iranians played with the UN, played with the IAEA. If you actually build a peaceful nuclear program, why you hide it beneath mountains? Why you enrich uranium more than 60%? Why you actually want to build the mechanism to put it on the ballistic warheads? So we know better than that. Some leaders choose to ignore reality. They say, it's too complicated. I will leave it to the next in line to deal with this problem. Okay. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they have a different approach.
You mentioned Trump and Netanyahu. Is there a difference?
They took tough decisions. It would have been much easier for both of them to sign an empty agreement like the JCPOA and play the game that everything is okay.
I understand you've made that point. So you have made that point. Thank you for that. You mentioned Donald Trump and Netanyahu there. Is there a difference in the aims here? Because we've just heard from the White House spokesperson a couple of hours ago listing what they're trying to do, destroy the nuclear proxies, the Navy, the missiles. No mention of regime change. Do you want a new regime in Iran?
Well, first I would say there is no daylight between the US and Israel. I have been in diplomacy for many years, and to see the level of cooperation, in peace and in war between Israel and the US, it's beyond imagination. I think we all have the same goals. We want to deal with the nuclear threat, with the ballistic missiles, with the proxies, and also we want to create the conditions that will allow the Iranian people to hopefully choose a different leadership. No one can guarantee it, but definitely we pray for that day. The Iranian people deserve better. Look what they did in the last 47 years. They used all the resources to build a war machine in order to support the people of Iran.
I see. So if the Ayatollah's son, for example, we don't know who will take over yet, but for example, if they did, you can see a world where as long as in your eyes the nuclear and missiles have been degraded to such an extent, you'd be happy to continue and allow that regime to continue.
Luis, we don't have a conflict with Iran. We don't have borders with Iran. One should ask himself why the US and Israel, stretch their muscles and sacrifice so much. It's only because the Iranian radical regime chanted for years and took actions to destroy us. But, Israel is a peaceful nation, and we would love to see a different future for the people of Iran, but we have no conflict with them. On the contrary, we had a great friendship with the Iranian people until the revolution.
Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Luis.
Now, around the world, across the UK, this is BBC News. This is BBC News. Next, the Israeli military has warned residents of all towns and villages in southern Lebanon to leave ahead of expected military operations. Lebanon has been targeted since Hezbollah fired rockets into Israel. Wira Davis has been to a bomb site in the country.
Well, this is the scene of one of the latest Israeli airstrikes. It's a hotel called the Comfort Hotel, but it was also housing several families. This isn't an attack in the southern suburbs of Beirut. It's areas that are considered to be Hezbollah strongholds. This is an eastern suburb called Hasmieh. What has happened here, according to the owner, is that at about 4 o'clock in the morning, missiles came through the roof and exploded, as we can see, on about the first and second floors of this hotel. The owner and her family say they were so worried about the prospect of an attack that they were staying elsewhere with relatives when this happened. But a young woman who lives in a hotel, the receptionist, was on the first floor. She is very, very badly injured, according to the owner, and she's being treated at a nearby hospital. In the last hour, we've heard the sound of another airstrike in the southern suburbs, and Israel seems to be expanding its military operations. Remember last night as well that 4 people were reportedly killed in Israeli airstrikes way over in the Bekaa Valley. So this Israeli military operation, whether it's against Hezbollah, whether it's against other militant organizations, isn't just confined to Beirut and the southern border areas. Much more of the country, of the capital, now seems to be being attacked by Israel. We're not sure what the target was here, whether a Hezbollah operative had fled from other parts and they were staying here with their family. But what is clear, according to the owner here, and it's just her opinion, is that she blames Hezbollah as much as she blames Israel for what is happening now. She blames Hezbollah for bringing the war to Lebanon. Hezbollah and Israel, in the eyes and views of many Lebanese, share equal blame for what is happening now. But one thing is clear, there seems to be no immediate end to this conflict. Indeed, the Israeli military operation appears to be expanding.
Thanks to Wira for that. Well, Fawaz Shirshis is Professor of International Politics at the London School of Economics.
Let's contextualize what's happening in Lebanon. Since the ceasefire was signed more than a year ago, Israel has never ceased its military strikes against Lebanon. Never. Israel attacks Lebanon on almost daily basis. Hundreds of Lebanese, including children and civilians, have been killed after the ceasefire was signed. Israel...
Just to jump in there, Israel claims that there are fighters and Hezbollah people where in areas where they should never have been, and they were agreed not to be there, would be their counter to that, I'm sure.
Israel was attacking throughout Lebanon, including Beirut and the Bekaa Valley. Of course, Hezbollah exists in many parts of Lebanon, but the ceasefire was signed, and the Lebanese government, which was elected, and the Lebanese army were basically trying to position themselves, and they positioned themselves on the Israeli-Lebanese borders. But Israel kept humiliating the Lebanese government and attacking the Lebanese territories throughout Lebanon. It's drones all over Beirut. The fact is, and again, Israel was looking for a trigger to really carry out all-out operation in order to destroy the remnants of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah yesterday, by firing 3 rockets against Israel after the assassination of the supreme leader, was a reckless decision on the part of Hezbollah, provided the trigger, the driver for Israel to really come in now. And my take on it, and I hope I am wrong, I think Israel is planning or plans to really launch a ground operation, a bigger operation than what we have seen in the past 1 year or so.
So a ground operation in southern Lebanon, whilst it's also continuing its strikes on Iran and Tehran as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what we need to understand is that the American-Israeli war against Iran spreads across all over the Middle East and beyond. And your reporter had just mentioned what's happening on multiple fronts. This is really no longer a war against Iran. This is a war in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Lebanon, and the West Bank, of course, and Gaza. I don't really, I expect the Houthis in Yemen to join this war any moment now. What's really missing from the picture is that any viable American plan for the war. I mean, what's the end game for the American war? For the day after, it seems to me that the American thinking is that, okay, we break it and you take ownership of it, the Iranians, spreading chaos, because what seems to be happening in Iran now is the Americans and the Israelis destroying state capacity. It's not just really destroying the missiles, the ballistic missiles, and the nuclear facilities, but state capacity. And this has the potential to create chaos and civil strife.
Thanks to Fawaz Shirshis for that. Well, BBC Persian's Nafise Konavad is in Baghdad and explains how Iraq, which shares a long border with Iran, is trying to stay out of the crossfire.
Iraq has been trying so hard not to be dragged into this conflict. Iraq's airspace is closed, and Iraq has sent multiple messages to Tehran, to Washington, and also indirectly to Israel that the airspace of this country should not be used by any party to carry out attacks against each other. But there have been some reports showing that a part of the airspace had been already used by the US and Israeli jets to carry out campaign or refueling their fighter jets over Iraq in this campaign.
Thanks to Nafise for that. Well, the BBC's James Waterhouse is on the Turkish border with Iran, has been speaking to people who are fleeing about what they've been seeing.
Compared to yesterday, there has been more activity at the border crossing. Interestingly, the Iranian flag, just 400 meters across, has been replaced with a black one, presumably as officials mark the death of the supreme leader who was killed in an airstrike. For those Iranians emerging with their suitcases, many are reluctant to criticize the regime. Their expressions often tell a slightly different story to what they are saying. But many say change is coming. But crucially, they don't know what it looks like. One man described the bombing as being rapid and intense. And for those living close to the targets that have been announced by the US and Israel, they're likely to be hit, he said. There was one man that walked past, he looked visibly agitated, shouting Iran won't be beaten. There are supporters of the regime making their way out as well. There was one woman who said she'd seen terrible things. She lives in the UK, and she said she'd seen many people die from the level of police brutality she'd seen inside Iran. So you really do get a tapestry of emotions and views as to what is going on. As for Turkey itself, it is not happy with this war. President Erdogan has previously called it a violation of international law, and today we saw an Iranian missile intercepted as it was about to enter Turkish airspace. What did Turkey do? Repeated their calls for de-escalation. The foreign minister said steps should be taken to ensure this conflict doesn't spread beyond its already enormous footprint.
Thanks to James for that. Right, we're going to run through some of the live feeds we have coming into us here at the BBC in London. First of all, just want to start with a flight radar, actually, a website you may well now be familiar with. This gives you live updates of basically where planes are in the air at the moment, and you can see the very big, obvious area that they are avoiding. We have got an update, though. There are some flights trickling out, not very many, compared to the thousands of people that are trying to get out or have been trying to get out, of course, for days now. We understand an Emirates flight from Dubai is due to land at Edinburgh Airport around now, but we have been keeping up to date there with the airspace, as there are now some flights trickling out. This is BBC News. Next, Keir Starmer has defended the UK's response to the Iran conflict after criticism from Donald Trump for not allowing British military bases to initially be used by the US for airstrikes. The Prime Minister insisted it was crucial that the UK acted on a lawful basis and there was a viable, thought-through plan for the conflict. Here's Chris Mason.
This is HMS Dragon, currently in Portsmouth. It's being loaded with ammunition and is expected to set off for waters near Cyprus next week. It can spot missiles and drones and is being sent to protect a British base on the island hit by a drone at the weekend.
The situation in the Middle East remains serious and volatile. This government will be resolute in our focus, protecting British lives, bringing our people home, and safeguarding our national interest.
The Prime Minister has given America permission to take off from British runways on missions to bomb Iranian missile sites, but this hasn't happened yet. The Conservative leader wanted to know why the UK wasn't bombing those sites itself.
Iran is trying to kill our servicemen and women. He is catching arrows rather than stopping the archer. That's what we're talking about. Why is he asking our allies to do what we should be doing ourselves?
The Prime Minister didn't answer the question, but did set out what Britain is doing.
We're resupplying our air defence missiles today. Wildcat helicopters with anti-drone capabilities will be in Cyprus this week, and HMS Dragon will be deployed to the Mediterranean.
Then there is the potential economic impact of the war.
Experts are warning that families could see their energy bills rise by £500 a year as a result of Trump's illegal war. But millions of families and pensioners are already struggling to keep their heads above water thanks to years of a cost of living crisis.
Sir Keir said existing measures were cutting bills, but acknowledged how concerned many people are.
I was glad that we were able to bring energy price bills down by £150 announced just the other day. We will keep a very close eye on this. I do know how important it is for the British public.
And what of the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister?
This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
After those remarks yesterday, these today.
British jets are shooting down drones and missiles to protect American lives in the Middle East on our joint bases. That is the special relationship in action. Sharing intelligence every day to keep our people safe. That is the special relationship in action. Hanging on to President Trump's latest words is not the special relationship.
It'll be helicopters from this base near Yeovil in Somerset heading for Cyprus soon, armed with missiles capable of shooting down drones. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Correspondent Nick Johnson has been in Portsmouth to have a closer look at HMS Dragon.
Well, despite the news that she won't be leaving until next week, the preparations to ensure HMS Dragon is ready for both sea and war are underway, and they're very visible as well. I've actually come out on a smaller boat into the middle of Portsmouth Harbour to get a bit of a closer look. We've seen barges from the munitions depot further up the harbour sail and moor alongside HMS Dragon, and then that crane that you can see that's standing about 1 o'clock at the moment, that crane has been used to get that cargo off the barges onto the vessel herself. We've seen a fueling barge, which has been here for most of the morning. We've seen personnel go backwards and forwards along the pontoon where she's been moored alongside. There's also You can see that sort of black radar on top of the destroyer. That's been rotating at various points throughout the morning. So despite her departure not being until next week, these preparations are well and truly underway. And of course, she is being sent for defensive purposes, but she does have her own firepower as well. One of the missile batteries she has on board fires around 8 missiles in 10 seconds. She's crewed by at least 200 sailors. And the Ministry of Defense has described her as one of the most advanced anti-aircraft warships in the world. So she's not yet due to sail. When she does, it'll take around 5 days for her to get to the Eastern Mediterranean. Those Wildcat helicopters armed with drone-destroying missiles, in the meantime, it sounds like they're being sent out beforehand separately. HMS Dragon, on the other hand, she's here for the next few days.
Thanks to Nick for that. Right, I just want to end with a couple of the live feeds we have coming into us here at the BBC. Let's start with Beirut, the night sky there. We are keeping across various locations across the region. We have Doha as well, which we can show you now. That's it from me. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News.
Admiral Lord West is a Labour peer, but was First Sea Lord as well as Chief of Britain's Naval Staff from 2002 to 2006. And Lord West, I think we should start. Pete Hegseth said this was the first submarine-launched torpedo, I think he said, since the Second World War, a ship down. But actually, the Belgrano literally is an example of that since the Second World War.
Absolutely. Yet again, he's talking rubbish on something. Basically, the Belgrano was torpedoed by HMS Conqueror in 1982. And so this isn't the first one. It's the first one, I think, by an American submarine.
Right. Now, the Belgrano was a very big moment in the Falklands War, a very controversial decision in the end, that the British struck the Belgrano and hundreds of people, the Argentinian naval personnel, were killed in that moment. Is it controversial for the Americans to shoot down a ship in the Indian Ocean, in outside the naval base of the Iranians?
I'm sure that people will make it controversial, but what I find fascinating is I've been in active operations now many times in my 60 years. Not once has that been a war. Even the Falklands wasn't called a war at the time, and no one ever declares war. So it makes it all slightly tricky. And I have to say, I can see some people would think, gosh, this is well outside what we might call the area of operations. Is this something that is acceptable, or is it outside international law? I think it is acceptable because effectively the Americans are at war with Iran. No one ever declares war now, as I said, but I think they are at war with Iran. It is a pretty horrible event. I feel sorry for anyone involved in it. You know, the sailors involved. It was pretty ghastly. The torpedo that was used looked like one that probably liked the sound of the engines and propellers, because it went and hit the stern of the ship. And the torpedoes now designed to blow up underneath the ship, and you'll see they lift it out of the water, break its back, and it is very sort of massive shock to the whole thing. And the sailors are totally unaware. They probably weren't expecting anything at all.
Yeah, but for you, if you're at war, there is no limited theatre in which you're fighting. Everything is fair game wherever it is, if it's a military asset.
I think that is the case. But what it does mean is, in the sense, you could say this is now a global conflict in some ways. Why? And there's nothing wrong with the Iranians attacking some base in Khonas by terrorist action or something. These things, are all accepted if you've gone and you've thrown toys out of the cot and you're actually fighting in a war.
Live from London, this is BBC News. An Iranian warship has been sunk by a US submarine, killing at least 80 people, as the US says its military operation has been remarkably successful.
We're moving towards complete and total control of Iranian airspace. We have continuous 24/7 strike operations ongoing. We've had more than 2,000 targets that have been struck.
Iran's president says his country had no choice but to fight back the US and Israeli attacks. Iranian missiles and drones are shot down as they headed towards countries like Turkey, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Thousands more Britons are leaving the Middle East after enduring days of disruption and cancelled flights. We have teams across the region that will bring you all the very latest on the events in the Middle East. Hello, I'm Geetha Gurumurthy. Thanks for being with us. It is day 5 of the US and Israel's war with Iran, a conflict which has spilled across borders and escalated far beyond the Middle East. Well, the US has now sunk in international waters an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan authorities say 80 bodies have so far been found. The US Defense Secretary announced a submarine torpedo had sunk the warship, the Iris Dina. The Pentagon released this footage of the attack. About 180 people are thought to have been on board. 32 were rescued. Elsewhere, NATO air defense intercepted an Iranian missile heading towards southern Turkey. There is a large US airbase nearby, but it hasn't been confirmed if that was the target. Israel says it's launched a 10th wave of airstrikes on targets across Iran. A US-based human rights group now estimates that more than 1,000 Iranians have been killed in the war so far. Meanwhile, Israel has issued evacuation orders for more people to leave southern Lebanon as Hezbollah positions are attacked in the capital Beirut. Well, the ongoing conflict has caused travel chaos across the region, leaving much of the airspace around the Gulf closed and thousands stranded. In the last hour, the first UK government-chartered flight was due to leave Muscat in Oman, evacuating Britons. As the war escalates, we're expecting to hear from President Trump in the next few minutes. He's meeting tech bosses at the moment at the White House to discuss new energy plans, but it's likely he will be asked questions by reporters on the Iran war. We'll bring that to you as soon as that happens and comes into us. Well, within the last hour or so, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has been taking questions from journalists. She was asked if regime change in Iran is still the goal of the Trump administration.
The stated military objectives of Operation Epic Fury are as follows: eliminate Iran's ballistic missile threat, destroy their naval capability, disrupt missile and drone production infrastructure, sever their pathway, and end their pathway to nuclear weapons. And I can report, as you all saw from the Pentagon today, that thus far this operation has been remarkably successful. Again, we're moving towards complete and total control of Iranian airspace. We have continuous 24/7 strike operations ongoing. We've had more than 2,000 targets that have been struck. Nearly 2,000 munitions have been employed. The first 24 hours of this campaign were described nearly as twice the scale of the 2003 shock and awe campaign. And we've seen that the enemy, the Iranian rogue regime, their retaliatory strikes against the United States and the threat reduction has reduced significantly. If you look at the Iranian ballistic missile launches, they're down 86% from day one levels. So while the United States military continues to increase its complete dominance over this rogue regime, they are weakening day by day.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Washington, Helena Humphrey. And Helena, we are hoping to hear from President Trump within the hour. But we've heard, as we saw there, from Caroline Leavitt, and we also heard today from Pete Hegseth. Indeed, this is something of a blitz of messaging that we've had from the administration today on this war. Hearing there from Caroline Levitt, touting what she has said are the successes of this war, saying that she expects to see total US dominance of the skies over Iran in the next few hours, she said. Now, it was interesting, she was asked repeatedly about a justification for this war and the aim as well. And she said that there are four objectives in this: destroying the missiles, destroying the navy, stopping proxies in the region, and stopping the development of a nuclear weapon. One thing to point out is that she was asked repeatedly whether this is about regime change. Remember, President Trump had said at the beginning of this war for the Iranian people to rise up and topple the government. She wouldn't commit to that, I think it's fair to say, in that press briefing room once again. She was also asked about an imminent threat, that imminent threat that prompted President Trump to join with the Israelis in launching this attack. And she said that this was all based on President Trump's, quote, feeling based on fact that Iran posed a threat to the United States. Now, she was also asked about a strike on a girls' school in Iran, which saw dozens of civilian casualties. She was asked, did the US strike that school? She said, not that we know of. We are investigating. We do not target civilians. But you mentioned the fact that there'd also been a Pentagon press briefing earlier with the US Defense Secretary, and my colleague Tom Bateman, the State Department correspondent, asked the Defense Secretary about that. Take a listen to that exchange.
Thank you. Tom Bateman with the BBC. Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look and investigating that. Red tie in front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
A very interesting exchange there, Helena. So the administration is still facing a lot of questions, and Donald Trump expected to appear, as I said, within the next few minutes, potentially.
Yes, indeed. He is speaking at an event for tech bosses with regards to energy plans. But of course, what we'll be waiting to see is those questions that gathered media can put to President Trump with regards to this war. Worth pointing out as well that Congress, the Senate today, expected to vote on a bipartisan war powers resolution, essentially senators having to put their name next to and say where they stand on this war. There's another war powers resolution as well, which will be taken up, where this could seek to limit what the president can do next in this war. Because remember, 5 days ago when these attacks were launched, they were done so without congressional sign-off from lawmakers.
Helena Humphrey, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Well, I'm joined now by retired Admiral Gary Roughead, US Chief of Naval Operations from 2007 to 20.
Gracias.